In the history of art, there are many great accounts of mentoring. There is, for example, the wonderful relationship between the shy and ambitious young poet, Elizabeth Bishop, and her older mentor, who was Marianne Moore. Even in Elizabeth Bishop's later work, it's possible to find a cadence or a phrase which pay homage to the work of the older poet, who made clear to Bishop when they met in 1934, when Bishop was 22 and Moore 47, what a serious adventure poetry was, and how much slow, painstaking work it took, and how much accuracy it would involve. Moore also took Bishop home to Brooklyn to meet Moore's formidable mother. They went to the circus together, and they began a long correspondence. By the early 1940s, however, it looked as though Bishop needed to swim free of her early anchor. She sent Moore a poem from Key West, now one of her best-known and most admired poems, a poem called Roosters. Marianne Moore disliked some of the poem, but more ominously, so did her mother. Both women disapproved of vulgarity, and they believed that Bishop had put too many earthy words such as water closet, into the poem, and also that the stanza structure was too rigid. They stayed up all night rewriting the poem for Bishop. They disliked the title Roosters. They wanted something more neutral, gentler, and in all innocence, I'm not making this up, they renamed the poem Cocks. Bishop, when she received the new version of her poem, was not amused. The mentoring, which had been invaluable, had now come to an end. There were other cases when the mentoring seemed to end before it had indeed started. But while the Irish poet W.B. Yeats and his associate Lady Gregory sought to help the young writer James Joyce in every way, Joyce responded by biting the hand. He told Yeats that Yeats was too old and there was nothing he could do for him, as though it was Yeats who was looking for a mentor, but he wasn't. Joyce was grateful then when Lady Gregory found him work reviewing books for a newspaper. Indeed, he was so grateful that his first review was of a collection of folk tales edited and collected by Lady Gregory herself. In these stories, Joyce wrote in his review, he found evidence of senility. But perhaps the most moving version of a mentorship was that between James Joyce himself and the young Samuel Beckett, who became part of Joyce's Paris circle in the early 1930s, as Joyce was working on Finnegan's Wake, his last masterpiece. In those years, Beckett learned about Joyce's single-mindedness, his dedication, his belief in the work itself, in the autonomy of the imagination. By the end of the decade, Beckett had learned enough about Joyce's wish to totalize, to use maximum means towards his goal, for Beckett to realize that his own tone would always be minimal, that he would thrive, or perhaps suffer is a better word, in a realm of lessness. He had learned enough from Joyce to know how to go his own way, and maybe that is one of the primary functions of the mentor. I want to ask the people who have been involved in this program to talk about their experience, and I need to introduce everybody to start with. Jennifer Tipton is a lighting designer well known for her work in theatre, dance and opera. Her recent work in opera includes La Traviata at Teatro Real in Madrid, directed by Sir David McVicker. Her recent work in dance includes Alexei Rozmansky's Shostakovich trilogy for American Ballet Theatre and San Francisco Ballet. In theatre, her recent work includes indeed my own play, and we had a wonderful experience working together, The Testament of Mary on Broadway, and at the Barbican in London, and also Richard Nelson's Four Apple Family plays at the New York Shakespeare Festival. Jennifer teaches lighting at the Yale School of Drama. She received the Dorothy and Lillian Gish Prize in 2001, the Jerome Robbins Prize 2003, and in April 2004, the Mayor's Award for Art and Culture in New York City. In 2008, she was made a United States Artist Gracie Fellow and a MacArthur Fellow. And she is currently the theatre mentor in the Rolex Mentor and Protégé Arts Initiative. And she's working with the young Mexican lighting designer, Sebastian Solorzano Rodriguez. Jennifer, can I ask you to start and to talk about your experience as a mentor? I mean, even if you want to talk about, did you have a mentor when you were starting?
Oh yes, I definitely had a mentor. His name was Tom Skelton, and he was wonderful in that he pushed me into situations that seemed to be quite difficult, but he knew that I could do them. And so I never failed in the beginning, and it was fantastic. And I really, through him, came to adore lighting, and also to this day I adore it. In lighting design, in lighting, what you're looking for is a good eye. And it's so very, very difficult to tell that when you're speaking to somebody. So my biggest quandary in choosing a protege, and Rolex does a wonderful job of finding several people and then allowing you to choose one among the several. And I couldn't decide what to do to judge the eye of the people. There were 4 of them. And I finally hit on going to see a play together and then speaking to each one individually about many things, of course, but also about their experience of the light in the play. And it was very interesting to me because Rolex also did a wonderful, gave me wonderful material on each of these people before I met them and interviewed them. And I thought at the time that Sebastian would never be the one from the material that Rolex sent to me. And then after talking to him about the play and his experience of the light in the play, I knew that he, among the 4, was the only artist. And so, of course, I wanted to work with him. And we've been together for a year now. I've just gotten back from Houston, where we had our last in-theater experience together. And so that was a bit sad. But we started, the first event that we had together was indeed Testament of Mary at the Barbican in London, which was a great experience because Deborah Warner, the director, is very involved in the light and makes a lot of demands and is therefore always pushing and sitting right there with me at the table. And the other things that I did over the year were not so director involved, shall I say. I went to Paris to recreate the light for Dances of the Gathering, a Jerome Robbins dance. And of course, Jerome Robbins is no longer with us. I also lit at Brooklyn Academy of Music the piano etudes, the full etudes of Philip Glass. Very unusually, I am beginning to light concerts like that. As a matter of fact, in Houston, I lit Messiaen's Visions of Amen. That is 2 pianos. Sarah Rothenberg is a pianist that I have worked with quite a bit. And so Sebastian was able to see 2 things, 2 concerts with light. And then there was La Traviata in Madrid, where there were 3 casts. And so I was there for 3.5 weeks, and we did La Traviata over and over and over again. There were 3 days when we did it twice in the day. I love La Traviata, and the singers were terrific, all 3 casts, so it was great, and it was a great experience for Sebastian to see that. Sir David McVicker, the director, was not there. It was being recreated by another assistant director. So there was not the great interplay between a director and a lighting designer that usually happens when the creation is new. Anyway, so it was dance and concert and opera and theater. It was a fantastic experience. And I too went to Mexico City to see Sebastian's work and learned a great deal about him and from him in that experience. So it's been a rich, full year, exciting for both of us. I have come to be extremely fond of this sweet, wonderful artist that I now have as a friend. And he is thinking carefully about what he's going to be doing with his life. It may well be that he does not, that he moves away from theater and into light as art. And it was good for him to end in Houston. There are quite a number of Terrell installations in Houston, all of which he saw, so he went home with a lot to think about.
Jennifer, when I worked with you, it was very hard at the end not to feel that for all of us, that we'd learned quite a bit from you. I didn't learn anything about lighting from you, because you were working so quietly and effectively, and that wasn't the issue. The issue was that since this was collaboration, I think one of the things a mentor has to do in the theatre is to teach somebody or show somebody how to be quiet, how to stay in the shadows listening, while everybody else is having a lot to say. So in other words, was the experience for him one where he watched you actually, let's say, casting your very calm light on a rehearsal space? Was that part of the deal?
Yes, absolutely part of the deal. And in the beginning, he was very nervous. In lighting, there is always, usually, an assistant. Always, usually, yes. Most of the time, there is an assistant. But I made it clear to him in the beginning that he should do nothing, because he should be looking at the stage and not looking at paperwork or the computer screen or anything like that. And it made him quite nervous to be doing nothing, because rarely does one do nothing in the theater. And but by the end, I think that he, of course, also at the end, he was saying, "Oh, I didn't pay enough attention. I didn't learn enough," and as one does when it's over. But I think he learned a great deal from being quiet.
Peter Sellars is very well known. Everyone here will know his work as a groundbreaking director for his collaborative projects and the extraordinary range of his work. He's established a reputation for bringing 20th century and contemporary operas to the stage, and he's been a driving force in the creation of many new works. He's led several major international arts festivals, and he's professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. He's also the recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship, and in 2010 he served as a theatre mentor to the young Lebanese director whom we saw earlier, whose name is Maya Zib, as part of the Rolex Mentor and Protégé Art Initiative. Peter, can you tell us about that?
Well, I think in theatre at least, nobody's interested in what older people think. Theatre exists for every generation to make their statement, and their statement is frequently made exactly against an older generation. So mentorship in theatre is a little strange, because in fact you're meeting the people who are here to wipe you off the face of the earth. And they're not interested in what you have to say, or they will hear it and then do the opposite, because of course that's why they're here. So for me it was very, very interesting to get to know Maya. I think I chose and Rolex has this astonishing process of research where they come up with 80 or 90 names from all over the world, which are then winnowed down by a series of committees. And there is no theater, festival, or museum that has that depth of research on their staff. So really what Rolex is also doing is combing the world for astonishing people. I chose the artist who was least developed and had the smallest body of work. So there was more of a wide open space in front of both of us. And then my rule was not to be involved with her work in any way at all, and mostly not seeing it ever, and really just being a friend. because my attitude about being an artist is no one can tell you anything. You just have to learn it yourself, and you have to find your path, and in fact, your path has to be found by you. So I stayed away from her work completely. Meanwhile, what I did do, because Maya was part of a theater collective in Beirut, was get to know her circle of people. And I have to say, very movingly, Rolex did something amazing. And we all made a series of events together in Beirut that gathered different communities in that city around specific artistic moments. And so it was not just completely a private situation. And definitely Maya came and saw what I was doing, and I think that did give her a sense of confidence, because when you see somebody who just behaves as if they know what they're doing, that's very helpful. And also I think Maya comes from a culture where a certain type of assertion is complicated. And so I think I was able to be useful in that respect, but the most important thing was my own life opened profoundly in getting to know Maya. And now Beirut is a city that is part of my life, and there's a large circle of artists there who I'm in dialogue with. And Maya's work is seen at a different level, because people are now paying attention. And that idea that somebody's now paying attention to what you're doing, and that you've been selected, I think is extremely valuable, and particularly in those contexts, and also when you're in a situation which is politically sensitive. Because of the Rolex recognition, bureaucrats, government people, university people have been served notice, pay attention. And the world is watching what happens to this young person. And that creates a different aura around their work and what the possibilities they have are. And that's why I really am so moved by the opportunity of the Rolex program. At the same time, the other thing that is extremely important is all of us have rather narrow worlds. And anything that gives us a wider canvas and a wider sense of where we are in the 21st century, I think that's really important. And so Maya was able to enter many, many different worlds with me that would not normally be part of her world. And she took me into worlds that would never have been part of my world. And I think, obviously, the best way to learn is to teach. And so Maya was my teacher in Beirut. And Maya constantly opened to me the cultures that she was engaging with, the political issues she was engaging with, the very complicated governmental structures she was engaging with, and to be with her as she and her group were pursuing their work after the Israeli invasion in the south of Lebanon, and really work of rebuilding. And these were truly formative experiences in my own life. And meanwhile, for her, she had a guest who was known around the world. So again, in a small village in southern Lebanon, there was a different type of attention suddenly everyone had around what we were doing. So it just created a different set of dynamics that I think opened some worlds.
Peter, I wonder, in the way you work, is it about rejecting a lot of ideas, or having brilliant ideas that suddenly dissipate, new ones come, a constant business of erasing what was great yesterday in order to get somewhere new? And I'm wondering if in the mentorship process you opened that world to those people in Beirut, for example, how your mind works and how your projects work and how you build them.
Well, I think what theater has to offer, and what I think where we're moving in the arts in general, is away from this notion of individual genius and individual brilliance, and recognizing that knowledge is held by communities, and aspiration is held by communities. And thirst is held by communities. And the sense of necessity is held by communities. And theater is about entering and focusing those aspirations, that hunger, that thirst, and that sense of disappointment, and then the sense of hope that has to follow the disappointment that we now feel all over the world as we watch your fondest hopes crushed day after day by an absence of political possibility at this moment. So art, I think, plays a crucial role in terms of giving people something to deal with in the midst of the disappointment. Something that keeps your focus moving forward even while you want to retreat. And something that gives you a way to refine your ideas at a moment when you've been completely rejected. And so for me, in Beirut, of course, the political life of these last years has been devastating, over and over and over again. What is it that keeps people moving forward, that keeps people gathering, that keeps this incredible urban culture seething and alive with ideas and with possibility? For me, theater is about that. And so it's not so much about making a painting and erasing certain parts of it. It's actually feeling a community itself begin to advance certain ideas or begin to sense this is not the moment for that idea. And that is a powerful experience that nobody's in charge of. If the dynamic is correct, if you have an exciting dynamic, things begin to emerge that nobody in the room could foresee. And that's what you hope for in theater.
Thank you very much, Peter. Our next mentor is Michael Ondaatje, who's one of the best and most adventurous novelists writing at the moment. He was born in Sri Lanka. He's been living in Canada since 1963. His novels include Anil's Ghost, The Visadero, In the Skin of the Lion, and The English Patient. And he is currently the literature mentor in the Rolex program with the Bulgarian writer Miroslav Penkov. So this is an interesting moment because obviously what Michael says will be what will be listened to very carefully by his protege. And if he says anything that is untrue, I'm sure it will be corrected. So if you just watch this guy carefully while Michael is talking. I hope that's no pressure.
No, I'm going to change the subject. Because I thought I would talk about being a protege as opposed to being a mentor. I still feel I'm more interested in being a protege than a mentor. So all the false uniforms I've been wearing in Europe for the last while have been false. And I thought I'd just talk about how I was affected by mentors. I think most of the mentors I had were strangers to me. I didn't really meet them. And I'll give you an example. In Sri Lanka, he's no longer alive, but there's a famous dancer named Chikrasena. And I spoke to him at the end of his life, and I said, what made you a dancer? And he was a very revolutionary dancer of vernacular style. And I said, so what made you a dancer? And he said, I read a book by Isidore Duncan. And so suddenly a book written in England affected the whole tradition of dance in Sri Lanka. And I just think that mentorship is as you said, goes across all kinds of boundaries. It's not something that is just, for me, it's a literary tradition. It's something much more. And so writers like Calvino or Alice Munro, whoever it is, would affect me across boundaries. And I think what interested me too was the idea of being influenced, having mentors in other art forms. I mean, ideally, I think I should be allowed after a year of being a mentor to be a protege to either Jennifer Tipton or this guy next to me. I would love, probably for a week. I envy the fact that you can talk technically about things, whereas in literature it's so difficult to kind of, in some way, show how different grades of lighting can be affected. But I think also, my mentors were people like Diego Rivera or Kurt Schwitters and his collages, or even Ray Charles or something like that. I mean, these are people, that music and that language and that art form and all paintings or photographs by Rob Frank, all these things I think affected my writing in some way. And I think the thing about mentorship is it's not so much that they have an influence on you, but I think that a mentor gives permission. But it allows you to kind of expand the boundaries of your field. And I think this is very, very important. Because I think, we don't want to stay in the same set of rules no matter how old you are. And there has to be a kind of constant change. I think that's, what I would like to see in Protégé. Also, it had an effect on me. I think it was James Baldwin who said, in America, they don't want you to have a career. They want you to have a success. And I think that's an absolute important rule to have as an artist in that time.
Well, I would also like to be a protégé, Michael, and if I could go to Toronto, I would like to be one with you. And what I'd actually like to do, and I wonder if you could tell me, A, if I could do this, but B, if I can't, just I would like to be in the room when you're working. I take it you work in longhand. I take it you have notes or lines already written for some of the passages. There's something already there that you work from. Please correct me, this is what I'm imagining. And I'm imagining also that images come to you, that so much of the work is image-led or image-nourished. And I want to be there for the moment when those images come and see them word for word appearing down on the page. I mean, is it like that? I take it you work in silence. I take it you just work pretty hard. So I just wonder, in my day in your office, I fly on the wall. I'd be really quiet, I promise. What would I see? I mean, what would it look like?
Well, first of all, I can't write if there's anyone I know near me. Even my dog wouldn't be allowed, because I'd be worried about what the dog is thinking. I do write in longhand, and I'm not sure I'm waiting for the image to appear. I am waiting for I don't have a plan for the book when I begin the book, or a plan for the scene, but that is governed by the nature of the character I'm within at that point in the book. And image may come, and it may or may not work. I sort of distrust everything I'm writing at the time. I mean, it's really about a third or fourth draft, and it survived 3 or 4 drafts, so I then can leave it in there. And it's like someone who laughs at his own joke that he's writing. That never works.
I'd like to see what you were erasing as well, so I could take
a lot of erasing. But a lot of erasing goes on. Yeah. Okay. The book comes to about 2/3 of the final length, I guess.
Am I allowed to jump in very quickly? That an immediate wall of defense against what you're suggesting is the fact that Michael's writing is ineligible handwriting, impossible to decipher. Okay, for me, at least. That would be a great.
Yes.
It's very beautiful, though.
Can you read it yourself? I mean,
I can read it in context, yes. I mean, so what is this word? I would not know, but there's something subtle in that. I can read that.
Okay. We're going to listen now to Julia Lee, who was a protégé of Toni Morrison's, and Julia Lee is the author of The Hunter, which is a New York Times Book Review Notable Book of the Year, and Disquiet, which is winner of the Encore Prize in the United Kingdom. Both books have been widely translated. In 2011, she wrote and directed a feature film called Sleeping Beauty, which was selected for the main competition at Cannes. And in 2002, 2003, she was mentored by the Nobel Prize winner, Toni Morrison. Julie, can you give us an account of what that was like?
Yeah, sure. I was part of the first round of this program. So the program wasn't in existence, and at the time I'm Australian, but at the time I was living in Paris, and an email came into my inbox. I think it was titled Rolex Mentor and Protégé Arts Initiative. I'd never heard of it. To be very honest, I was quite suspicious of corporate involvement in the arts. I was like, what is this? And I started reading down the page, and then I saw, would you like to apply? Your mentor will be Toni Morrison. And at that point I was, well, it's good enough for Toni Morrison, it's good enough for me. I think I sent in, I decided to apply. I think we can say that the way it works is that it's not an open application process, but I was nominated by somebody at the time who was a secret nominator, and I think I can say that it happened to be, years later I found out that it was, I won't say who, but it was an Australian literary critic who I had never met before or said one word to or anything like that. So I sent in some materials, and then the 3 finalists came to Princeton to meet with Toni, and I can't remember what we did. I think we just all sat around and had a talk, and that was that. I was just thrilled to get the trip to America. I thought that was great to stop there. And so I was delighted to hear that I had been selected for this process. Also, I knew, frankly, there are no miracle cures for one's artistic life, and a bit like what Peter was saying, both Toni and I were aware that a writer really does, we really do work alone, and really do work alone. It's not this sort of collaborative thing. The way it sort of played out was I was working on something and I would send excerpts, and as you will all know, Toni was a brilliant editor before she wrote her first book at 39, by the way. And so it was quite helpful then. She would effectively do a kind of a copy edit on these excerpts. For example, I never heard of putting TK in a manuscript. I don't know if you've heard of that. Have you heard of this? Have you seen it? It means like, it's what journalists do, I think. It's like to come back to. So it's kind of a strange gift in a way, because perhaps you should push through that difficult moment and not come back to anything. Perhaps that is part of the real challenge in writing. But yeah, sometimes now if I'm not wholly convinced by something, but I want to move ahead, I'm impatient to move ahead, I might put a little TK in bold in the manuscript just to remind me to have another look at that closely in the second pass through. That's a tiny little thing. But I suppose, more broadly speaking, just simply Toni Morrison's sense of validation that she would be interested in my work was important, that she was aware of what I was working on, so a sort of absent presence was a nice feeling. And I also, I guess I spent time with her, attended a symposium with her and a few other things, and I mean, she has an incredible presence, conducts her writing life sort of impeccably. Also to see the shifts between the more private life and then the public life. It was interesting to see that. And I guess I really valued her commitment to the writing life. So these were some of the things.
Could you be a bit more indiscreet? Does she prefer tea or coffee? I mean, tell us something we don't know. No, but seriously.
More gossip than me.
No, we're going to be finding out a lot about Michael in a moment. So just before that starts, if you could just give us some account of, for example, what's her working day like, or is it longhand?
I don't know what her working day is like. I know she's got her office in Princeton with assistants. I think that's amazing to have an assistant. writing. I think assistants who can help, for example, as you know, some of her work is historical, so to do some of that research. That's interesting. But I think that, well, if I were to be a mentor, I wouldn't want to have a protege who I thought was going to be a tattletale.
So that puts me in my place. However, I'm going to have a second try at this in a moment. Miroslav Penkov was born and raised in Bulgaria. His stories have appeared in many magazines such as Granta, Best American Short Stories, and his debut collection, East of the West, was published in over a dozen countries. He is the current literature protege, as we know, working alongside someone who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, is Michael Ondaatje, who was just called away. He's on a plane to Toronto now, which means we can really say anything about him that we like, since he was so careful not to be here. I think he's a bit embarrassed about being spoken about in public. And Miroslav is assistant professor of creative writing at the University of North Texas, and is the fiction editor of the American Literary Review. Okay, let's be serious first. What did you learn? How did it go? Yeah, oh yeah, then
I'm very glad that Michael's on the
yeah.
plane now. Well, it's funny when you should mention this, but I too was a little bit suspicious of this program on two counts, and I always thought it was because I'm Bulgarian, and I think Bulgarians are born suspicious and suspecting. When I received the email, I mean, you look at this email, it says Rolex in the header, and you're thinking, somehow this bypassed the spam filter. We get those emails a million a day. And then I kept reading, it's like, okay, this sounds a bit legit. And they invite you to apply, and then of course you apply. How could you not? And then another Bulgarian trade, I started worrying. And the second suspicion. Before I was even invited, told that I would be a finalist, I just started imagining what if I was chosen? Would this work? Can this work? Can you orchestrate a relationship that is meant to arise naturally? I mean, you mentioned Elizabeth Bishop, Marion Moore. It's a very specific set of circumstances that allowed these two women to be as close as they were. Elizabeth Bishop's father died when she was 8 months old. Mother suffered with mental illness. Actually died the year, 34, I believe, when the two women met. Marion Moore never married, didn't have children, so took on Elizabeth under her wing, mothered her in a way, nurtured her. I mean, it's a perfect relationship, arose naturally, synchronistically, the way they met. So can you manufacture this? And also, is the pairing going to be, I mean, you see how Bulgarian things are, there's so much work. If the pair is not right, I think a little bit of damage can be done to the mentor in the sense of wasted time, annoyance, but also to the protege in the sense of the ego is going to suffer a little bit, self-esteem will be lost, but also possibly the work may be thrown in different directions if it's not an appropriate match. And I don't want to be too mystical about it, but I think choosing a mentor, there's something, a guide, someone to lead you, advise you, to give you strength. And then, of course, when I was very lucky to actually be chosen, none of this mattered anymore. All of this worry was put to rest. And then we started meeting and talking, and I understood that it was pointless to worry because, and I'm glad that he's on the plane again, but Michael's truly a wonderful person, and talking to him, it just opened up new perspectives. And now to be a little more specific than that, something that I never thought I would be interested in was writing for film. It just didn't interest me. I thought I was above it. I was going to be a novelist. I would worry about every little word, every little paragraph. The son said, I don't want to write technical documents. But now Michael talked very, very charmingly about film, and he's influenced so much by film. In many ways, the way he puts his novels, or that's just my observation at least, resembles in a way the way film is put together in the editing room, where he would move one part from here to there in the novel. So, and then I read his great book, The Conversations with Walter Murch, and just got, for lack of a better word, inspired. I mean, very interested. What if I were to try my hand at writing a screenplay? And just, again, synchronistically, it so happened that in Bulgaria, 2 of my stories were being option at the time. So I called the director and said, can I help? And I've been helping since, and it's been wonderful. And then the other thing that just listening to even something that Michael mentioned now that I understood is the writer's hunger for influence from other art forms. That you need to be a proper writer, you really need to be hungry for knowledge outside of your genre, outside of fiction, but even outside of poetry and film. I mean, you're influenced by painting, by, came to Bulgaria and we observed so many frescoes and murals and from music. So now I started just researching different topics and being interested. And then it really also helped that I had this novel that I had just finished when the mentorship began, or a draft of it. So we were able to have something to look at. Some text, and Michael was very kind to read the first 100 pages and give me very specific suggestions, from line edits, omit words like water closet and rooster. But there really is a rooster actually within the first 20 pages.
You should change that word.
Yeah, right away. To like grander suggestions that I was able to apply to the following 100, to more than the first 100 pages, like the suggestions of how to further complicate the main character, the narrator of the novel, how to alter the pacing of certain chapters, and so on. So I mean, it's been an incredible experience, and yet I know that there are at least some young writers out there, and I want to just reiterate what Michael was saying. Yes, this has been great for me, but it is not necessary for you to have Michael Ondaatje as a mentor to write your own books. You have all the mentors out there, and all these beautiful, beautiful writers, and their own work is essentially all you need to guide you. And final thing, just I was reminded again, when I was very little and kind of a dysfunctionally shy child, my mother would literally hold me by the hand and take me to the playground where another kid was playing and say, okay, here, this is Miroslav, what's your name? Okay, now the two of you play. And I feel like what Rolex has done is something similar. It's like, hi, this is Michael, this is Miro, now play. I think it's important to allow yourself the freedom to play.
It happens in Ireland.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
When Miro came to Toronto, the first few hours he seemed a bit distant. I said, because the World Cup was on, I said, are you a fan of the World Cup? I said, I'm taking all the shows while I'm back here in Toronto. So we got postponed all literary discussion, watch the World Cup for 2 days.
You have to have your priorities straight.
In Ireland, it happens now, it really is every year, where a new genius emerges. Some young guy or girl, someone in their early 20s writes a book and everyone calls it a masterpiece. And it really is still happening. And it's an interesting literary culture in that way. But when you get to my advanced age and you watch this, you realize, do they have the slightest idea of what's coming? In other words, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, your 60s. You have to keep the show on the road. You can write one book. But the idea of writing 5 or 6 or going in at, say, Toni Morrison stage and having a new novel out this year, did either of you get that sense from Toni Morrison or from Michael Ondaatje of that idea of how the amount of dedication required, the amount of seriousness required, the amount of thought and care put into not just this book, but the idea that somehow or other the mind would be dedicated towards the creation of books in some funny, permanent way that mightn't show obviously, but might be displayed in some other way that you might have seen. Would either of you like to comment on that idea?
Yeah, I think that touches on that idea of this commitment to the writing life. I mean, I've sort of long held that commitment, but yes, it's extremely hard to sustain a whole creative life. I don't think the projects I don't think it gets easier. I don't know if you found that from book to book. I mean, they sort of each present their own, their own challenges, each one. I mean, what did the Zen Suzuki, always be a beginner? That's a little bit how I approach each project. Yes, I have so much admiration for people who have a body of work. Yeah.
I also think it's a little bit important, I feel, for a young writer not to try to see too far into the distance. It's too scary. I mean, it's too scary. You're going to scare yourself too much. But it's been just really nice to observe. I mean, that's the other thing that this allows you, kind of vicariously, to see how your mentor handles himself in different situations. But one thing that Michael has been advocating with my manuscript, but writing in general, is patience. And it's something we have very little of, maybe because of the success as opposed to a career. Even career seems to be the wrong word for a writer. But take your time. Write your book well and write it to the best of your ability and push yourself. And what's the rush? What's the rush?
Did you have a mentor, Peter? Did you? I mean, I'm trying to imagine you as a protege.
From a very young age, I was collaborating with people who were way better than me, who allowed me into the room. But, which was really wonderful, and they could tell that I was bringing something, but the most important thing was I was really interested in this, and they would, in the nicest way, say, "That's very good, Peter, but now look over there." And I kept having people shift what I was looking at, which was extremely important. And for the first half of what seems to be being called a career, but I can't imagine it as a career, but the first half of my working life, I was the youngest person in the room, usually by far. And so I was always learning from people who were giving me amazing amounts of time, and I would never have hired the young me. And they did. And then stayed with it. And even my blind spots, they stayed with it and supported what I was doing, even while they tried to shift what I was looking at and how I was looking. But I actually, technically, started apprenticing at a marionette theater when I was 10 years old, and really learned my first year cleaning the toilets and packing the popcorn and cleaning the lemon off the floor. In my third year, I was allowed to work my first puppet at the end of my third year. And that idea of apprenticeship, where you're not allowed to do anything, and you watch and you listen, and you tell yourself when you do it, it'll all be different. And of course, then when you do it, you're imitating everything. And then gradually, out of that, your own voice emerges without you knowing it. And that process of apprenticeship was actually through my whole teenage years, and I learned the old-fashioned way of carrying somebody's luggage and literally listening to everything and absorbing and absorbing and absorbing. Yeah.
But I just want to say, I was there when Peter did his first, in my knowledge of it, and he burst on the scene like Athena from the head of Zeus. That's Peter Sellars.
See, and I want to apprentice myself now to this person. It's not too late.
I think we have time for questions from the audience, and we have a microphone. You know where the microphone somewhere here?
We learned about the process of selecting the protégés. I'm wondering how the mentors are selected, whether they're like self-nominated or whether Rolex finds them. And I also wanted to ask the question is, what happens if the protégés selected the mentors? How would that be different in the Rolex program?
Okay.
I was on a committee. Rolex asked me to come to Geneva for a day, and I was part of a group of people who suggested and chose mentors. We chose a list of mentors, but Rolex made it clear that they might adjust that list a bit.
Very briefly, as a mentor, once I was selected, I was told there would be, I think there were about 20 possibilities of people, and then it was reduced down to 4, at which point I read all the work by the various protégés that were up in the final 4, where they read interviews with them that were given to me, and also watched the video by them about what they wished to do. Then we all met in New York, and I met every protege for about 3 or 4 hours, plus having various meals with them. At that point, I went home and had to decide who I would choose.
Oh, I'm just going to change the topic slightly, but mention something that I'd forgotten to say, which is like, so I think it was 2002 or something that was the first year. Here I am today, right? Many years later. And this is because, and this is a separate thing, which is a sort of a feeling of community between the mentors and proteges over each cycle. And so I have become quite close to some of the other proteges that were in my year. And then we've met up over the years, and in fact I collaborated in my film with Ben Frost, who's a great musician, and he did the score. And you know, I have to say that was because, literally, because I saw, oh, there's a new music protege, it's Ben Frost. I saw that in his bio he'd done a score for Sellars, for a festival in Krakow, and I happened to know another Australian friend who was running that festival, so I called him up. What do you think of Ben? Oh yes, you have to work with him. So I guess it's this nice thing that this is not just I guess there would be too much pressure if you had to come up with something straight away after your year of mentorship. So I think that it's kind of nice that there's a sort of, I don't know, what would you say, sort of easygoingness about the length of time that things take. And, yeah.
Thank you. I have a question for Julia. I know that you wrote a couple of books and then became a film director. So I was wondering whether that was a direct result, becoming a film director was a result of your protégé-ness with Rolex, and also then who were your film mentors?
Okay, so if I'm really honest, I think I was having a bit of a hard time with my second novel, and so I've loved film. Like I loved film for a very long time. I've seen many films. So I thought, oh, I'll try my hand at film. And actually, that was nothing to do with the Rolex program or Toni Morrison. And so I wrote my script, was getting it made in Australia, and we have a pretty good funding system there. We have a lot of government support. The principal investor was the government film agency, Screen Australia. And they said to me at that time, look, you haven't made a film before. We're going to have to get you to work with someone who's got more experience. And they proposed Jane Campion. So I've been incredibly lucky. I met her, she didn't have to say yes, by the way. But, so we had these meetings. I don't know, what is it, these things when you meet somebody in there? I don't know how it works, but I guess that I go into these things kind of like I'm already on my way, in a funny way. Like, and I try to be very direct. But I think in these occasions in your life, these crossroads, I guess you bring to it your whole character, and you have strange ways of sensing people's vibe, if you like. And yeah, so I was very fortunate to work with Jane. Yeah.
Hi, I have a question for Peter Sellars, and that is, how did you incorporate your mentorship into the rehearsal of a show, for instance? I work in theater, and I know how you have very limited time. There's a scene, there's a break, you rehearse something else. How did you incorporate the mentorship into that process?
I think one of the things you are doing when directing is watching and listening. And watching and listening as deeply and as closely as you can. And you're looking not just to see what something is, but to see what it could be. So you're trying to constantly see when something is about to morph into something else, or where you can offer an impulse that will help it go where it's going. So that, but most of the work is actually listening, and most of the work is watching. And so it's great to have more eyes and more ears. So to have Maya in the room, to have a young avant-garde theater maker from Lebanon sitting next to me in the Chicago Lyric Opera as I'm staging Handel's Hercules, and we're dealing with US military catastrophes in the Middle East. And I have a young, militant Lebanese visionary sitting at the table. The way she reads a scene and the way I read a scene are very different. And so it's incredibly enriching to have another set of eyes and another set of ears who are seeing something I wouldn't have seen, and recognize a possibility I would never have recognized, or need some kind of cultural translation because I'm assuming that where I'm going is clear, and then for her it's not at all. And so those type of experiences in theater are very enriching when you have a wider field of response. The other thing about Maya is she's a generous, lively, inspiring presence. And so she brings this other good energy into the room. And I think one of the difficult things is, as soon as you're well known, most people don't speak honestly to you. They say what they think you want to hear. Whereas they would have no problem having a wildly ranged discussion with Maya. And so frequently I would learn a whole bunch of things that people were willing to say to Maya that they would never have said to me. And so it was a marvelous way in which Maya was so disarming and so curious and so alive. And she opened up all kinds of discussions in the room that would not have taken place if it had just been me there. So for me, it just enriches the sense of what the community can accomplish.
Is being a mentor a stressful or a joyful experience?
Well, I was going to respond what was just said, which I think which relates to this. I think one of the interesting things about if you're a writer or a theater director or whatever it is, at a certain age, it's very difficult to get criticism from the people around you. Writers who are already established, editors, even if they're very good editors, are cautious of what they can say. And the examples you gave, you also have Ezra Pound teaching Yeats, the older Yeats, a lot. And I think it's very important for any artist of any age to feel that he has to change or she has to change her rules. I think that's why, actually, I think one of the reasons I took on the mentorship was because meeting Miro had that quality of an equal discussion between two people and being influenced. One was not the mentor, one was the protege. So it was a very it wasn't stressful at all for me. It might have been for him, but it was wonderful to speak very equally about a book and books we're talking about during that era.
I was just wondering about the process as far as from the protege standpoint, in the sense of selection, because in both these cases they were invited to apply. But obviously, from an artist's perspective or a protege's perspective, you have people who you want to work with. And obviously from the process, one has to obviously have really good candidates. But I'm just wondering, is there a way that the protege could also apply or choose or have part of that be part of the process? Is it only coming from Rolex in this case?
It does mean, this is my sense of how it works. It is not necessary for the proteges to be involved because of the way they're selected. And if I understand how this program works, is that there is a group of people, very knowledgeable people, who after identifying who the mentor is, will meet with the mentor, talk to him or her, and figure out the ideal profile of a protege. And then they will go out there into the world and find people that fit to an extent. And then these people are approached, and then at that point, it seems that there's already a match established.
I'm wondering, in addition to discussing the more artistic aspects of your work, did the conversation ever turn to the business of getting published nowadays and what that is like at all? Thank you.
Well, I can't really say that it did, because I was in the lucky position to already have a publisher for my novel. And I always really strongly believe that you worry about worry, there is that again, about writing all the time, and that influences your life and can kind of hurt your life. But the moment you start worrying about publishing as well is when not only your life is going to be ruined, but your writing as well. So I avoid that kind of, there's so much information, literature out there online, you can read about agents, publishers, there's enough. You don't really, it seems like a waste to me to talk to Michael about that.
Well, I could have told him a few things, but I guess too late now.
I have a question for any of you who are willing to answer this. I'm a high school teacher, and I'm not Bulgarian, but I worry and obsess about things as well. And it just seems to me as of late, there's been such, and I hate to sound completely jaded, but I'm just going to say it, less interest amongst my students at the high school level in the arts. And it really concerns me and scares me. And for a variety of reasons, as I'm sure you can all understand. And I'm wondering if you would have any, if you were in my position, any thoughts on inspiring this current generation to continue, you know, the wonder and the joy of the arts.
You know, I have to say, I teach in university, and I have a very large class, and I insist on meeting every student of this class of 400 for 10 minutes, and just trying to find what interests them and what they're thinking about and what they're focused on. And I do that outside the classroom, and just in just a quiet way to spend a little time with each person, where they don't have to say something in public, and they don't have to impress their friends or whatever. And just to have a thoughtful moment where, because I think when people are young, they haven't become who they're becoming yet. And there are a lot of things on their minds and a lot of questions, and they're not ready to assert certain things. And they're frequently dealing with really complicated issues at home. I mean, truly, what this generation has been so abandoned, so horribly abandoned by this society. And this is a society that is the first society in human history that has not wanted a better life for their children than they have for themselves. I mean, in human history. And so for me, it's so shocking what this next generation is already carrying and can't talk about and won't talk about. So for me, to create the space to find out what people are thinking in a non-pressurized way is really important. And once you get under the surface of it, I'm just really moved and very impressed with what they are doing and how they're doing it, and the strategies that are evolving in a new generation. And that they would ever connect anything I'm doing, that would be interesting, but at the same time, I totally respect what they choose to be interested in. And I think human beings are interesting, and what interests human beings is interesting. And if you just start with that, and follow where they're going. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the great things is getting to know a young person well enough that you can just say, okay, you're interested in that, and now how about looking there? And just gradually expanding the view. But I'm also moved because in this generation, these kids have been so hyper-parented in one way, so fussed over, and another way completely ignored. And so that they're not immediately communicative or revealing what is really going on or what's on their mind, I think is their culture. And one of the great things about the arts is most of the arts is about secrets. Most of the arts are about things you would never dream of saying aloud to anyone. And that's what gives the arts their power. So for me, the silences of this next generation are pregnant, powerful, and I think are going to lead to something amazing.
Thank you very much. We have time for another question. Oh, look, yeah, we've got two. We're going to take you, and then you, and then can you get the mic again?
Thank you so much for taking my question. I'd like to ask Mr. Ondaatje. I'm not fortunate enough as Miroslav to be Bulgarian. I'm Greek. We're going down the drain, as everyone knows, but we're neighbours. And I'd like to ask Mr. Ondaatje. There's a whole debate about the MFAs, for example, the Iowa Writers Workshop, just to mention a very well-known one, versus the New York City emigrating to the USA, coming to New York. That's the hard way, the way of people who don't have much time and fortune on their hands. But there's this whole debate about what leads to real writing versus cookie-cutter literature, and there's a whole ongoing debate, and I was wondering what's your take on that? I mean, how much is either of the two kinds genuine, and especially for people who are not fortunate enough to enter the hallowed halls of literature through the Rolex Mentorship program or a similar one, or knowing a great writer or something?
I don't know too much about the MFA programs, so I'm afraid I'm not the best person to ask. As a writer, I never took any writing courses. I took literature courses, and so that's what I got. And I was very lucky. As I said before, my mentors were strangers. I didn't really have anyone close up to me saying, "Go this way, go that way, or avoid this." And I'm not quite answering the question, but I just want to say one thing that drew me to saying yes to doing this mentorship was that it appealed to me a great deal that the Rolex program is a very international program, and this is very important. It's not just North American or English or it's a huge variety of people. 4 people who I could choose from. 2 were from Zimbabwe, one was from Nigeria, and one was from Bulgaria. And it was that range that, in fact, allows your mentor not just to be a stranger anymore, but it can be someone that you meet and talk to and, alter that person, and you are altered as well. I didn't quite answer your question, but I don't really know enough about that program.
Just a second, because I do know a little bit about MFA programs, teaching at a university in Texas where we have a PhD in creative writing with a concentration in creative writing. I'm a big fan of those programs. I know they get a lot of stick, but what they can do a lot for a writer. There's one big stipulation: do not pay out of pocket to go to one. That's a big thing. Do not be in debt to go to program. Someone asked earlier, can a protege choose their mentor? Well, that's one way. You want to work with George Saunders, don't go to Syracuse. Try to. How do you go? Work hard, write well. Once you go there, I think MFAs are terrific in that they're going to give you the time you need to write. I don't know why people underestimate the fact that you just get 2 or 3 or 5 years where I teach, where you can just work. You can just work, and even more importantly, equally importantly, you will be surrounded by like-minded people who love literature, love books, and you're going to have a discussion about that. What's not to like about MFAs in that respect? I don't understand, really. I don't understand that debate. And so, yeah.
We're going to take a last question right down there at the back. Yeah. Great. Just there. Yeah.
Thank you. I've been a teacher for 25 years, and I'm currently a mentor for 7 new teachers in high needs urban schools through teaching residents at Teachers College at Columbia University. And my question is for the mentors, if you have any pearls of wisdom, something maybe that you wish you had known during the mentoring process that you could help me out with. Thank you.
Could you just rephrase that slightly, just so that they could just take the mic back on this?
Just words of wisdom that you wish you would have known when you started out being a mentor.
Words of wisdom, come on, and let's end on words of wisdom. Come on, guys, you can do it. Look at you. It's which is first. There's a queue here. Look, they're so ready to go. Jen?
Why don't we ask you for a change?
Jennifer, we're depending on you.
I just said Colm.
The other thing I would ever say is that you should finish everything you start. And that it's a mistake not to, because often halfway through something you suddenly get it for the first time. And also, if you're a writer, you sort of, halfway through a book, you know the rest of the book, or you come to know it. You feel, well, why should I be writing this? It's not for you, it's an act of communication, it's for everyone else to read, it's got nothing to do with you. You've got to make it, send it out. So when you're halfway through a book, get up early in the morning, every morning, stop drinking. Not that anyone here is drinking, but if they were, stop it. And finish your book. I don't know if that's any help, but I mean, does that work in the theatre? I mean, in the theatre, give us some wisdom about how to work in the theatre. Michael?
No, I don't know anything about the theatre. I've learned a lot from the theatre. I mean, some of my work has been done on stage, and blocking and lighting, truthfully, really did influence my writing. In some ways more than film, which I think was crucial to me. As a writer, the great thing for me is rewriting, editing, re-editing. The way you're all talking about watching a scene again, add something, and then take something away. So that, for me, is a central rule about being an artist, is not just making, but remaking and remaking.
I truly believe, I don't know that I learned this through mentoring, but I think an important thing that happens in the theater is that you do begin and finish a project. You don't just sort of say, okay, that's the time I have, and then go on to the next. So there is a kind of discipline that has to occur, and perhaps I'm made more aware of it by the fact that there is a protégé sitting behind me.
And again, I think any human being, the most important thing you can do is pay attention. Most people never have anyone ever really listen to them. So what it means that you just really pay attention to someone, and they realize that you're paying attention, and they realize you're listening. And as soon as someone realizes you're listening, they speak differently. Everything changes. And it really is the sunlight and water. It's just the quality of attention. And I think we live in a period where the quality of attention is quite intermittent. And so if you can offer people completely serious attention, it's usually completely transformative.
I think that's a good way to end. Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much.